Units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces repelled enemy attacks in the area of 17 settlements of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. According to Ukrinform, this is stated in the summary of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine posted on its Facebook page. So, according to the military department, over the past day, units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces repelled the invaders' attacks in the areas of the settlements of Plashchenka and Belagorovka of the Luhansk region and Berestovo, Belagorovka, Yakovlevka, Soldar, Bakhmutskoy, Bakhmut, Opatny, Klishchivka, Andriivka, Kurdiamovka, Vodian, Pervomaiskoy, Veseloy, Mariinka and Novomykolovka of the Donetsk region. In addition, over the past day, the enemy has inflicted 10 missile and 16 airstrikes, as well as carried out more than 30 attacks from multiple rocket launchers on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine and settlements along the collision line. The civilian infrastructure of the settlements of Shevchenkovo in the Kharkiv region and Kramatorsk in the Donetsk region was subjected to missile strikes. The threat of enemy missile strikes on energy system facilities and critical infrastructure throughout Ukraine remains, the General Staff said in a statement. As noted, the situation remains unchanged in the Volyn and Polsky directions. No signs of the formation of offensive enemy groups were found. In the Seversky direction, the enemy fired mortars at the settlements of Sopich and Timofeyevka of the Sumy region. In the Slobozansky direction, areas of more than 10 settlements were shelled from artillery. Among them are Odnorobovka, Streleka, Niskachnoy, Ternavaya, Staritsa, Ogurtsovo, Chernyakovo, Chuganovka and Vyureknia of the Kharkiv region. In the Kupiansk and Lymansky directions, the enemy is on the defensive. He carried out attacks from tanks and artillery of various calibers in the areas of Sinkovka, Tabyevka, Berestovoy and Vishnovoy in the Kharkiv region and Makievka, Plashchenka and Belagorovka in the Luhansk region. In the Bakhmut and Avdiivka directions, the occupiers are focusing their main efforts on conducting offensive operations, trying to improve the tactical situation. The districts of Serebryanka, Verkhnekamensky, Belagorovka, Yakovlevka, Soldar, Bakhmut, Kurdiamovka, Yuzhny, Avdiivka, Opatny, Vodian, Pervomaysky, Nevelski, Krasnogorovka, Vesely, Mariinka and Novomykolovka, Donetsk region, in particular, were shelled by tanks, mortars, barrel and rocket artillery. In the Novopavlovsky direction, the enemy is on the defensive. He subjected the areas of the settlements of Velikaya Novoselka, Ugledar, Prechistovka and Zoloteya Niva of the Donetsk region to fire. The enemy is defending in the Zaporozhye direction. Artillery attacks were recorded, in particular, in the Orkhov area of the Zaporozhye region. In the Kherson direction, the occupiers are also on the defensive. They carry out attacks from mortars, barrel and rocket artillery on the positions of our troops, as well as settlements of the Dnipropetrovsk and Kherson regions. The fire terror of the civilians of Kherson does not stop. Over the past day, the aviation of the defense forces has carried out 22 strikes on the areas of concentration of personnel, weapons and military equipment, as well as 3 strikes on the positions of anti-aircraft missile systems of the enemy. Also, Ukrainian servicemen shot down an enemy Su-25 aircraft and an unmanned aerial vehicle of the Orlan-10 type, the message adds. According to the General Staff, units of the Ukrainian rocket forces and artillery, in turn, over the past day, struck 2 control points, an ammunition depot, 3 areas of concentration of personnel, weapons and military equipment, as well as an area of concentration of artillery. Russian troops fired grads and heavy artillery at 4 settlements in the Dnipropetrovsk region at night. This was announced in a telegram by the head of the Dnipropetrovsk Regional State Administration Valentin Reznichenko, Ukrinform reports. All night the Nikopol district was shuddering from enemy shells. The Russians fired 10 times from grads and heavy artillery at peaceful towns and villages. 4 settlements were affected: Nikopol, Manganese, Krasnogrigorievskaya and Pokrovskaya, he said. According to Reznichenko, none of the civilians had previously been injured as a result of the shelling. In Krasnogrigorievskaya Hromada, 5 private houses, outbuildings, garages and power lines were damaged. In other communities, they inspect the territories and find out the details of the attacks. In the rest of the districts, the night passed without emergencies. The alarm sounded even without arrival. And at the moment everything is calm, he added. Recall that over the past day, the enemy army was also in Nikopol, the settlements of Manganese and Krasnogrigorievskaya. The Russian occupiers sent a new batch of wounded and the bodies of their dead to the hospital in Melitopol. According to Ukrinform, this is stated in the summary of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine posted on its Facebook page. On December 2nd, another batch of wounded and the bodies of the dead occupiers were delivered to the local Melitopol hospital, it says. At the same time, the General Staff clarified that in the period from November 28 to November 30 of this year, up to 70 wounded and more than 230 dead Russian occupiers were taken to hospital facilities in temporarily occupied settlements of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Also, according to the department, looting of the local population takes place in the territories temporarily occupied by enemy troops. From the local shops of Novaya Kakhovka, the Russian occupiers take out all goods and equipment, including freezers and cash registers. And in Novonikolivka, Zaporozhye region, the occupiers numbering up to 100 people on December 2nd of this year organized a check of the documents of local residents, the seizure of personal valuables and household appliances, the report says. In addition, in the settlements of the temporarily occupied Kherson region, Russian occupiers threatened to deprive the local population of parental rights to send children to educational institutions under the Russian program. Recall that over the past day, the armed forces of Ukraine repelled enemy attacks in the areas of 17 settlements in the Donbass. At night, the enemy attacked the Zaporozhye district again, hit the village with missiles. This is reported in a telegram by the head of the Zaporozhye Regional State Administration Alexander Shakruk, Ukrinform reports. The enemy continues rocket attacks on our peaceful lands. This night, several raids were recorded in one of the villages of the Zaporozhye district, he wrote. As a result of the explosions, windows were blown out on the territory of private buildings, roofs of private residential buildings and power lines were damaged. The fire was extinguished by rescuers. People were not injured. Recall that on the eve of the Russian troops struck Volnyansk Zaporozhye region with S-300 missiles. On the night of December 4th, at 2:40, Russian troops carried out a mortar attack on the water area of the settlement of Ochakov in the Mykolaiv region. According to Ukrinform, this was announced in a telegram by the chairman of the Mykolaiv Regional Military Administration Vitaly Kim. According to him, in the Mykolaiv district on December 3 at 14:15, one of the settlements of the Kutsurub Hromada was subjected to enemy shelling. There are no victims. Tonight, on December 4, at 2:40, the enemy launched a mortar attack on the Ochakov community's water area. There are no casualties, Kim said. In Nikoliv, Pervomaysky, Voznesensky and Bashtansky districts, the day and night passed relatively calmly, the chairman of the regional state administration added. As Ukrinform reported, Kim called on the enterprises of Nikolaevshkina to work at night. More than 270 Russian servicemen were injured in two temporarily occupied districts of the Zaporozhye region over the past day. This is reported in the telegram of the Zaporozhye Regional Military Administration, Ukrinform reports. During December 2nd, in the Melitopol and Vasilyevsky districts of the Zaporozhye region, the occupiers lost more than 270 people wounded, the report says. Information about the dead is being clarified. It is also added that looting of the local population continue in the territories temporarily occupied by enemy troops. Earlier it was reported that in Novonikolivka, Zaporozhye region, occupiers numbering up to 100 people on December 2nd organized a check of documents of local residents, the seizure of personal valuables and household appliances. Russia is seeking negotiations to achieve an operational pause in hostilities in order to ease the growing political pressure on the Kremlin and prepare its troops for new offensive operations against Ukraine. This is stated in the latest report of the American Institute for the Study of War, ISW, Ukrinform reports. According to American analysts, the latest survey conducted by the independent Russian sociological service Levada Center showed that 74% of Russians still support the actions of their troops in the war against Ukraine, 42% of respondents strongly support and 32% partially support. At the same time, only 41% of respondents support the continuation of military operations, while 53% said that Russia should start peace negotiations. The results of the Levada Center surveys conducted between July and November 2022 indicate a slight but steady weakening of support for the war among Russians, the ISW report says. ISW notes that the results of the Levada Center correlate with the data of an internal study commissioned by the Kremlin in November, which showed that 55% of Russians are in favor of peace talks with Ukraine and only 25% are in favor of continuing the war. According to the report, both polls show that the morale of Russians and political support for the war will decrease if the current trends at the front continue. The longer the war will lead to losses of Russians, and the Ukrainian troops will win back positions, the more the socio-political dynamics will turn against the Kremlin. An operational pause under the guise of peace talks could ease the growing political pressure on the Kremlin and allow Russia to restore its strength for new offensive operations, the analysis says. Key findings of ISW: the Ukrainian military probably reached the eastern, left, bank of the Dnieper opposite Kherson. French President Emmanuel Macron, in a TV interview on December 3, stepped up Russian information operations about the need for NATO to consider Russia's security guarantees during the likely negotiations. With the onset of winter, conditions in eastern Ukraine are becoming more favorable for higher rates of operations. The defense ministers of Russia and Belarus met in Minsk to strengthen bilateral security ties between Russia and Belarus. Ukrainian troops continue their offensive to the northwest of Crimea. Russian troops continued ground attacks around Bakhmut, in the area of the cities of Avdiivka and Donetsk, as well as in the western part of Donetsk and eastern Zaporozhye regions. Russian authorities evacuated Russian collaborators from Olshek. The Organizational and Staff Department of the National Guard of the Russian Federation, Rosgvardia, confirmed that the mobilization continues, despite President Putin's statement about the completion of partial mobilization on October 31. The Russian authorities continue to use prosecutions to strengthen administrative control in the temporarily occupied territories. As Ukrinform reported, the American Institute for the Study of War, ISW, believes that the Kremlin's recent statements that Western financial and military assistance to Ukraine is the reason for Kiev's categorical refusal to negotiate with Moscow may pursue the goal of creating a situation in which Western leaders will offer Russia concessions to start negotiations and will not demand retaliatory steps from the Russian Federation. In the Kharkiv region, the invaders launched a missile attack on Kupiansk. The road surface and railway infrastructure were damaged. This was announced in a telegram by the chairman of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration Oleg Senegyubov, Ukrinform reports. The occupiers are again launching artillery and rocket attacks on Kupiansk. In Kupiansk-Uzlovoy, as a result of the shelling, the road surface and railway infrastructure were damaged, Senegyubov said. According to him, at about 23 hours, S-300 missiles launched by the Russians damaged windows and roofs in 5 private houses of the Shevchenko community. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, another rocket attack on the village of Shevchenkovo took place from the Russian side. There are no victims, Senegyubov added. He noted that local authorities continue voluntary evacuation of local residents. 185 people expressed a desire to leave. The process of evacuation to safer places in the Kharkiv region continues, says Senegyubov. In addition, during the day, the Russians attacked the settlements of the Volchanskaya Hromada and the Kharkiv region, as well as the Izyumsky district. There were no casualties. In the Sumy region at night, the Russian occupiers opened fire with mortars and used small arms. This was announced in a telegram by the chairman of the Sumy Regional State Administration Dmitry Zivitsky, Ukrinform reports. After midnight, the Russians opened fire from 120mm mortars, 8 approaches, on the territory of the Glukhov team. And about 1:20 in one of the villages of the community of Znobny Novgorod, the enemy used small arms. 6 single shots were fired, Zivitsky said. According to him, in both cases there were no casualties and destruction. As Ukrinform reported, on December 3, the Russian military fired at the border of the Sumy region. The enemy hit one of the villages with 120mm mortars.